So the Quran. I chose to read the Quran but in novel form. I didn't read it. I know, I'm sure people who are part of the Islamic faith, the Muslim community, I'm sure they have books that look similar to the Christian Bible, where it's leather, has thin pages, gold-plated edges, etc. It looks like a holy book. I wasn't reading it to maybe get it to encourage me to follow its faith. I wasn't reading it for that purpose. I was reading it as a student of literature and the world and world history. Just, we're all gonna die, and I just was curious to what was in this book, just like I'm curious. I was interested in the Torah, but the Torah is I'm sure it's written differently, but it's the 5 books of Moses, and that's in the Bible. So just like I'm interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, I'm interested in the Talmud, which is another book of Judaism. Just like I'm interested in rereading the Bible, just like I'm interested in novels. So the book is in my backpack. I have another reading book on hand. I'm walking up the hill to go to school today. But I just wanted to discuss some things without thinking too hard, just letting them come up naturally. Things that stood out to me while reading the Quran. Again, I got it in Penguin Classics formation, the way they published the version of the Quran and translated it in English. I'm not familiar with the Quran, and I would call it the holy form, faithful form, the way an everyday Muslim around the world, the way the book they carry. The only way I could get you to understand is just like the Bible, how it looks like a holy book, very thin pages, leather cover, etc. You know what I'm saying? So this book that I got translated into English, the Quran, is by my favorite publisher. I like other ones too. Ballantine, Simon & Schuster. Some other ones that aren't popping up right now, but so it's not like the Christian Bible where when Jesus speaks, it's in red. The writing is in red. You kind of have to figure it out when you're reading this one. And so, just to give you a little idea of what the Quran is, it's the holy book of the Islamic faith, the religion of Islam, or no, the religion of the Muslims. And so, somewhere around, I could be wrong, just approximating late 500, which is the 6th century, and the start of the 7th century, which is late 500, at the start of 600, is when the Muslim faith was created. When Gabriel, who's an archangel, Michael and Gabriel, an archangel of God, the God that the Christians believe in, the God that the Muslims believe in, and the God that the Jews believe in. Because from what I know, they all believe in the same God. They just have difference of opinions in between. And so Muhammad was approached by Gabriel, and God spoke through Gabriel and everything that Gabriel told Muhammad was put down, and they created the Quran. And so, let me see if I could avoid that blower. And so I start reading the Quran, and I want to get out some of these facts that are. So the Mecca is a place that all practicing Muslims try to village to, and it does mention it in the Quran for them to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. And Mecca is actually a place where Muhammad was born. I could be wrong, but I believe so, from what I read in this publication of the Quran by Penguin Classics. Mecca was actually the place Muhammad was born. And just as I'm reading the Quran and things that stand out, I guess I'll just walk back and forth right here. Pretty warm. So I just want to say a couple of things that stand out as I was reading it. Somewhere in the beginning of this publication of the Quran, I guess I'll start with the comparison between the Quran and the Bible. The Quran mentions the prophets, mentions Moses. Talks about Moses plenty, about Moses and how Pharaoh, his heart was hardened. It speaks about Noah. It speaks about Lot. Even Jonah, the one that got swallowed by the whale, mentions Joseph and how his brothers betrayed him. The whole story of Joseph, same story in the Bible. Adam and Eve, talks plenty of Adam and Eve. Talks about how God made Adam out of the clay from the ground. And that when God made Adam, he was so proud of his creation, he told all the angels to bow down. And Satan didn't want to bow down. He said, who am I to bow down to this human? And that's when God sent Satan down to hell. And that's how Satan became Satan, disobeying God's order to bow down to his creation of man, which is Adam. There's a few mentions of, dark-eyed, dark-haired virgins. The watering brook. Sitting peacefully on a couch. This is what awaits the Muslims, those whose faith is in Islam and the teaching of Muhammad. It's different than the Bible. It speaks about David. It talks about David and David's sin with Bathsheba. Mentions Solomon. The difference between the Quran and the Bible, there's no Psalms. There's no New Testament, no story of, Jesus. I forget the names, I haven't really studied Christian religion, Christian faith in a while. I just know it's the New Testament. There's no accounts of those who follow Jesus. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Peter, Paul, 1 James, Revelations. Again, there's no Psalms, there's no Proverbs. There's no Kings, 2 Kings. And maybe it's just a publication. It really just the Quran sticks to the point of believers, non-believers. It tells believers, it always says say with the semicolon, say this. When unbelievers say this, when unbelievers or people who claim to be believers are the ones that, just like the Bible mentions, if you read the Bible, you get this. It mentions, oh, look at them, the non-believers continue to, the way they respond to these people trying to proselytize, trying to convert them from one, they call it idolizing. If you don't believe in the God in the Bible or the Quran, maybe even the Jewish Bible, they consider you're an idolater because it mentions this multiple times in the Quran. You're following a God that cannot help you. You're believing in a God that cannot help you, has not proven his power to help you. So you're being a fool. And so you're following the same religion that was taught to you by your fathers, but Gabriel showed himself to me. Jesus did miracles. We have a new God, the one that told Noah to build the ark, the one that was there for Moses, who gave him Aaron to be his voice, and who freed them from Pharaoh, all of his people for 40 years, enslaved by the Egyptians. It mentions that whole idea of you're following the God of your fathers. And where it does say it in the Quran, the one I read, that non-believers are enemies. Almost every single page mentions you're going to go to hell. You want to be fools, but God is compassionate. God is merciful if you want to change your life. Similarities there, but I feel like the Quran is more of a paraphrase. They do have a lot of similarities within the Bible, but it's not as lengthy. It's not written out. Again, it doesn't have all these other books that I mentioned earlier, but it does always constantly say, God is talking to Muhammad. This is not Muhammad saying it. When God says you, a lot of times he's talking to Muhammad. And the thing about the Quran I notice is that it's like talking to you, it's talking to Muhammad, but it also mentions anybody holding the book. They consider all prophets to be equal. There's no hierarchy in this religion, this faith. There's no hierarchy. It's like you're either gonna prove your faith by your works, by just having faith in the God of Muhammad, the God of the Muslims. So you would have to read it to really understand what I'm trying to say. Kind of know a little bit about the Bible as well as read the Quran. And so some other things that stood out to me, just things that I learned while reading this. So they believe that Jesus lived. They truly believe Jesus lived, but he was no different than Moses or Pharaoh. I mean, not Pharaoh. He was no different than Moses. Moses' purpose. God talked to Moses. God literally gave Moses power in his staff that, with that staff, it turned into a snake. And when Moses had his hand in his pocket, and when Moses brought his hand out of his pocket, it was all white, like leprosy. And Pharaoh's sorcerers and Pharaoh's people seen this, and they're like, "Oh, you're a sorcerer," They considered Moses to be a sorcerer. But Moses said, "Bring all your sorcerers. I'll show you that they have no power over the power that God has given me." And this same thing, same story in the Bible. The best sorcerers in Pharaoh's kingdom came, and Moses was given power by God to eat up. His staff turned into a serpent that ate all the sorcerers' serpents, or whatever they were able to turn in, whatever the sorcery granted them. And so they don't see Jesus any greater than Moses or any greater than the purpose of Noah. They don't see it. They say, who is God to have a kid? This is what I read. Who is God to have a kid? God is not man. And every time they mention Jesus, they say Jesus, mother of Mary. it's what they say. Jesus, mother of Mary. Or no, Jesus, son of Mary, excuse me. Jesus, and then they'll throw it in there sometimes, you know. They threw it in there a couple of times, like, for those true believers who believe, you know, and don't believe the falsehoods of, you know, Jesus begot a child, or, and they don't see that. They see God as a power bigger than what we could even comprehend, just as it mentions in the Bible as well. And one story that stood out to me was kind of towards the beginning in this publication that I read, this English translation. And I would call it like a book form, you know, because it's Penguin Classics. And so there was a time where Gabriel's talking to Muhammad, and Gabriel, I guess, brought this up, or maybe God is talking to Muhammad. It doesn't decipher. The story is that Gabriel appeared to Muhammad, and Muhammad took this belief and built a religion that stands today. It's one of the second biggest religion in the world. And so Jesus is with his disciples, and his disciples are like, what's up? Like, you know, we're hungry. You know, show us a sign. Tell your Father in heaven to give us a sign, you know, like send us down some food. So Jesus looks up to the sky and he says, hey, oh God, you know, they want a sign. I'm trying to not make it too long, this video. And God is like, all right. So God sends them down food. And, God does something. I don't know if it's the food part, but God does something for them. But the way it's written, it's like God was about to leave, and then God says, well, before I go, he tells Jesus, hey, you're not telling people that they should worship you and your mother, are you? And then Jesus says, no, Father. You know, I tell him that, you know, you're the Almighty. You're the all-powerful God, like, you know, to worship you and nobody else. And I was just like kind of very interesting, you know, someone who knows the Bible, and you know, I believe Jesus lived as well. I believe he did what the Bible says he did. And there's times I've actually felt there was a power out here. And if you truly believe, and I just think it's an awesome story. I think Jesus, the story, what he did, and the way he didn't rebel, but the way he pissed them off by his faith, and he lived his purpose, and I think it's an awesome story. It helps you overcome, you know, helps you people overcome and get through the dark moments in their life. And, you know, I think all that devil shit could actually work against you and make you really have like a fear that's unhealthy. And, but I just thought that was interesting. Like Jesus was like what Muslims believe is that Jesus, you know, God checked Jesus, like, hey, Jesus, you know, you're not telling people to worship you, are you? And it was actually kind of like reaffirming, like, the Muslims, like this. I guess you could say it was like a newer religion, because Jesus had already lived, and the Christian faith was already thriving. The Jewish faith was already around even before then. But for anybody who's a follower of Islam and the teaching of Muhammad and the religion of, you know, the Muslims, that was like telling them, like, you know, this is the real story, I guess, happened in their belief, that God made sure to tell Jesus, you know. And it kind of put like a vulnerability there, like a humaneness to Jesus. Like, I mean, in the Christian faith, it's believed that Jesus, like, you know, he was all holy, you know, 12 years old. His mom seen him learning and studying. He's already showing signs of his purpose. And yeah, that was just kind of like, it's like, but you could also interpret it like God knew, but God through Gabriel was just trying to let people know, like, you know, I didn't want, you know, my purpose for sending Jesus down here wasn't for him to be worshipped. And it kind of made me like, oh, wow, the Catholics probably wouldn't like that part, you know. And Christians, too, who totally believe in Jesus, you know, who in the Christian religion, the whole New Testament is all about Jesus, all about He is the way to God. It's through the Son, and the Holy Spirit. When Jesus died, he left the Holy Spirit behind, which is a beautiful teaching as well. Like, and I think that's a real beautiful teaching, actually. Like, when it comes to literature and storytelling, just if it was real, it's so beautiful. And the Quran is not really telling you a story. It's giving you. It's not compromising. It's giving you, this is God. He appeared. This is what it is. And there's a hell waiting for you, or there's a beautiful heaven. And just like the Bible, it gets there too. The Bible does it as well, but it has a lot of other stories inside of the Bible. And so that stood out. And there was another one where, I didn't know this, but, Muhammad and his people were traveling. And like I don't know, some of them kind of got stuck somewhere, or they kind of separated. And one of Muhammad's, some important follower of his, which was a male, and Muhammad's wife, and probably more people, not just them two, but like they got separated from Muhammad, and Muhammad's wife got separated, and there was a rumor that Muhammad's wife was having some sort of peculiar affair with one of Muhammad's loyal followers of his time and of his movement, And so that was pretty interesting as well. It does mention a little bit about a woman being covered, and who is she allowed to like reveal herself to, her husband, her father-in-laws, or the males in her family, that's who she could like not have to be covered up around, she could be comfortable and show her face and hair and skin. And it does continue to say the non-believers are our enemy. And that's a little scary too, like some religious fanatics, because they're also like thought police, they don't understand somebody where they come from. And so they could be super radical, and if they're violent, they could assume that's under the umbrella of God. It's under they're doing like God's work if they're like harming people who just, I don't know. I mean, some people are really bad and are harming the world, but it could get out there, a little out there, dictators and crazy regimes being led by a super fanatic. And other than that, I think nothing else really stands out, like apart from the Bible. I just thought I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I have an understanding of what it's about, even if the version that I wrote was maybe a little shortened, maybe a little, cut down to the main points, but I'm glad I read it. And on to my next journey. Peace.